Thanks for joining us on the Hart Square Podcast today, David. It's really great to have you on and have a bit more of a chat with you. So at Hart Square, we obviously know a bit about Emprisia and what you do, but for the benefit of anyone who listening who may not know, I wondered if we could kick things off with a bit of an intro to yourself and Emprisia and what you do there.
Sure, thanks, Ellie. It's great to be here. So my name is David Cairns. I am founder and managing partner at Emprisia, founded with two colleagues back in 2017. And we exist really to help our customers and clients with what we call digital empowerment. And we do that mainly with those in the non-profit space and in membership organizations. And what we mean by digital empowerment is helping those organizations get closer to their audiences, whether that's their donors, their members, their supporters, their volunteers. And really that might mean that it's empowering the staff in those organizations, but equally we're often putting in place systems that help to empower the actual external audience as well. So we do that through implementing Salesforce CRM. That's the primary technology that we work with. And in terms of our remit, that covers strategic consulting through to which is focusing on establishing conditions for success and establishing a sort of a roadmap that our clients might need to go on, through to working on business analysis, which is getting under the skin of requirements and definition of processes and ensuring the systems are going to deliver to those. And then, of course, there's the systems design and build, followed by testing, training, deployment, and change management surrounds all of that. And finally, we support systems once they're in life in a business as usual context.
Fantastic, thanks, David. Yeah, and obviously, we know each other from having worked on various projects, and as we at Hart Square see, the projects that you deliver into that non-profit sector, and the great work you're doing with membership bodies and stuff. So, yeah, really good to have you here today to have a chat, and yeah, just to ask a nice open question to start with. I guess we talk a lot about project success. You've mentioned it yourself already. We all have our own opinions on where it starts and finishes, what causes it. What would you start, your kind of starter for 10, what would you say is kind of key to being successful in delivering an implementation project? Let's go with that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think for us, it probably would come down to three things. So the first of those is having strong governance around the project. And of course, we often play a role in that from our side, but we can help the organizations that we work with make sure that that's established from their side and the right processes around governance. And really for us, we're thinking, what sort of relationship does this organization want to have with its CRM now and in the future, and making sure we're putting the right groundwork in place for that and sort of laying the right foundation. So yeah, number one, strong governance. I think the second thing would be ensuring that we're focused on user adoption and ensuring that we're focused on the change management that often entails. Because these projects, an implementation project for CRM, are as much about change and transformation as they are about the technology. And so, I often will in speaking to our clients say, as much as 50% of this journey that you're on to implement a new CRM or transfer your CRM is going to be change. It's going to be driven by process change, getting your team members to do different things. So it's really important that we get that right, take them on that journey and make sure they're supported along the way and ready to adopt the system when it goes live. And then the third thing I'd say in terms of project success is being careful not to underestimate the data. So I think we might come on to talk about trends in more detail, but certainly organizations realize the power in their data, and I think have realized that more and more over time. But often, that can be a tricky subject and can be something that needs to be handled carefully. And so that focus on data and understanding how important that is to get right and to be thinking about early when you're moving through this process is probably the third thing. So yeah, strong governance, focusing on user adoption, and don't underestimate the data.
Excellent. Yeah, they're really good tips. Yeah, can we just drill into a couple of those actually, if that's okay?
Sure, yeah.
Particularly, well, I suppose start with governance is a really, it's a kind of a key topic, something we talk about a lot. and it's interesting you've described it as strong governance, which I absolutely agree with. It's almost kind of okay, what do we mean by strong governance? Because you've got, is it about the model? Is it about the personalities? Is it about the different roles? Do you have a kind of a good, what's your perception actually on what good governance looks like actually?
Yeah, so I think it can vary depending on the organization. And as I said before, often it's about helping the organization to define the type of relationship it wants to have with its CRM. And some organizations, by definition, tend to start from a point of view of being a bit more transactional around it. And, there's no right or wrong answers here, whereas others really want to take full ownership of it and, focus on comprehensive use across the organization. And so I think it can vary, but typically we would certainly want sort of project sponsorship or overall CRM sponsorship at an executive level, which doesn't mean, the board member, the CEO, whoever it may be, needs to be involved in day-to-day decisions, but certainly there needs to be a regular process where someone from that level of the organization is engaged. So with a number of our customers, we might run what we call CRM steering groups, typically on a monthly basis, sometimes quarterly. That will help inform how CRM is working for the organization, help channel any requests about future change to the CRM systems and that sort of thing. And that as a structure, as a framework, can be fairly lightweight. It can just be a handful of people that make up that steering group or that project board. Equally, it can have representation from across the organization. And so we've even had CRM steering groups where there's lots of people holding up numbers to vote for certain new features coming into the CRM. And so, it depends on the organization, because you can get really democratic with it, and that can really inspire, organization-wide ownership, and that might be a great driver. Or equally, some organizations want to be a bit more in the direction coming from the key stakeholders, and it's all about rolling it out to the organization. So I think it can mean different things in summary. We'd often work with that organization from our experience to sort of define the best framework around governance for them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Overall, that's really helpful. I think the key point you make actually about making sure the governance suits the organization. So it's not that there is a model of good governance or strong governance, whatever you want to call it. It's not like one size fits all, is it? It's about getting the right model for the given organization. Because I think within that, and you talked about, executive level sponsorship and steering groups, need those. That what you then have to have is a good relationship between that group and the project team that's delivering. So, and again, matching organizational culture, kind of where decisions can be made, how empowered your project group team are. Is that the sort of thing that you also, you help an organization to tune and pitch correctly for them? So that, because blockages on decision making are a real challenge to a project, aren't they?
Yeah, indeed. And I think there might be, if a particular organization, this is a topic that they really care about, and they're going down that, I spoke about sort of lightweight, heavyweight before. If they are thinking, we really need to focus on this, then to your point on decision making, we might suggest 2 or 3 frameworks. So rather than just governance, there are other frameworks, as we might call them, that work hand in hand with that. So one would be a framework for governance, which we've already covered. Second might be a framework for user adoption, coming back to that other point I mentioned being really important. So that is to say, rather than just, how's the organization going to share information and make decisions from a governance perspective, how is it going to actually drive the user adoption and the change management? And then there might be one around, the day-to-day changes in the system. So this is probably going a bit beyond the life of the implementation itself and into sort of business as usual. But I think having those frameworks in place is the best way to really get that definition from top to bottom in terms of how that organization wants to relate to its CRM and sort of broader technology landscape. So it's the governance thing working hand in hand with a user adoption framework and a sort of framework for how changes to the system are made.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent description of it, and plays into the points you made up top. It's not like governance isn't separate from that focus on user adoption that you talked about, and leading into change management. As you said early on, the project, the implementation of a CRM, which is kind of that success project we're talking about, but it's about what you're going to achieve afterwards, isn't it?
Yeah.
So focusing on user adoption, you said yourself, you said it's more than tech. The journey is about more than tech. It's actually almost not about the tech, isn't it? So when you get into that change management, is that the sort of, actually, sorry, how far involved in change management do you get yourselves, or is it more prompting clients to ensure that they have that strand within them?
Yeah, it's another good question, and again, it does depend on the organisation and sort of what investment they're making and how important they see that particular topic. But we can and do get fairly heavily involved in it. So often we would have something we call a change management plan as part of what we deliver. And that comes with a set of materials, a set of sort of documents that we jointly author and agree with a customer at the outset, part of what we call our project charter. And so that is about establishing what are the conditions for success and what do we want this implementation to achieve. But it would also do things like establish the key stakeholders, establish how day-to-day roles are going to change. What are we expecting people to start doing as a result of having this new system in place? What we expect them to stop doing, or do more of, continue doing. And so those sorts of things are useful to define up front. So that's fairly common to the majority of work we do, to have that upfront definition. And then as we get to the point where we're training and rolling out, that's where the change management piece can come back in. And so where we are involved, we tend to encourage organizations to think about it from a point of view of what changes are going to be sort of mandated. So yeah, what are you going to tell people on the team or tell your external users? Even these things have to be different. What things are you going to sort of support in terms of having training materials, having training sessions, having super users within your organization that can be points of contact, having representatives within the various teams. All those sorts of things are supportive in terms of the change. And then the third thing is more along the lines of how to sort of make it fun, how to make it stick. So what can we do to sort of gamify it? Can we be in a fun way, looking at things like leaderboards for how many people are logging in or how many people are adding new records, and how can we make it part of the fabric of day-to-day working life for the organization? So that might even include things like from an HR perspective, looking at use of the CRM system as part of someone's objectives from a performance and HR point of view as well. So yeah, those are the sorts of conversations we tend to get into. In terms of how much we drive that, actually, it's often more about getting the organization to drive that and coming back to those structures and frameworks, having the tools at their disposal to be able to do it under their own steam. But we can certainly help get them to that point.
Yeah, no, I think that's excellent. And it is about, like say, doing that up front, isn't it? So get that expectation out there early, that it is about, it's about that focus on the long-term objective of the program of work, isn't it? For which the CRM implementation project is one of the levers, but it's about, for an organization going through that implementation, it's making sure that they've got their kind of eyes on the prize thing, isn't it? It's what happens after the go live, and keeping that focus on the objectives. So indeed, then as you say, you're talking about what the BAU roles, what does the future state look like?
Exactly.
Do you then because that in our world that then plays into a kind of a benefits realization phase afterwards? Do you recognize that as a piece of the work that you're still involved in? Does that come along?
Yeah, I think we do, in the sense that we typically have an approach which would say, let's pick a date. Let's say the 1st of July is when the organization system is intended to launch. Mm-hmm. We would then support that with what we call go live support for a couple of weeks, which is sort of almost hand holding where we can. Being on site with the customer can sometimes be a good thing. Where that is allowed. We're sort of slowly getting back to that post-pandemic. But, so we typically have a couple of weeks where we're sort of at their side, just getting over any sort of early hurdles or teething problems, which we hope to have minimized by that point, given the focus on user adoption. But that's sort of the first couple of weeks. And then about a month in, so this would be 1st of August on this time frame, we would have a distinct sort of checkpoint. And what we would be doing at that is looking back at the project charter I spoke about and have an early assessment of, have we achieved what we set out to achieve there? Are we starting to see, the right sort of movement on the KPIs that we established up front? And for those organizations that we had done some road mapping with, we'd be evaluating, have we taken the right steps on the roadmap, or have we achieved a bit more or a bit less, and what would need to adjust on the roadmap? And for those organizations that don't have a roadmap, it's an opportunity to think about, where we go next. So I think whilst we might not refer to it in the same terms of benefits realization, that is certainly in that space an early checkpoint of how successful we've been, and it allows us to define what future relationship with that customer we might need to have. And it might be that we just move into that support of business as usual. It might be that we've done enough that the organization is fully comfortable to take ownership themselves, and we step away for a period of time. Or indeed, there might be a next phase of the development of the CRM that was sort of on the cards, or that they want to consider.
Qualifies, yeah. No, I think that's really good, because that, as you say, terminology is what it is, but it's that piece, isn't it, where that's kind of potentially kind of closing the loop, so that you've defined those KPIs up front, what your success criteria are up front. Yes. You go through, implementation projects aren't easy, right? They're going to have highs and lows and all that, and that's where you've got to keep people's eyes on that future, where we're going to get to, what we're going to achieve. And then, you go through that bedding in after the go live, and then bring it back around and say, actually, look, it makes people feel good. We're talking about project success, aren't we? You've got a mechanism there, which means people can tangibly see, we have achieved this, we have achieved that, and that sets them then on the next phase, as you say, whether that's embedding the CRM, changing ways of working, reviewing business processes, or further technical development. Doesn't matter as such, does it? It's about seeing that you've now achieved some of what you set out to do through the process. Yeah. And that's how we feel successful, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, really nice. I like that the kind of the way that ties up and comes through. Cool. I guess we have to then go back to the data conversation, don't we? That you that you mentioned up front. I wrote down, don't underestimate the data. It needs to be carefully handled. That's a very good description of what we all have to go through. You definitely, the point you made there was like, be thinking about it early, get to grips with your data early. Yeah.
So if I was presenting our methodology to you, Rob, which I won't try to do top to bottom now, what you would see is that data migration as a theme almost runs throughout the whole process. Okay. And I think this comes from earlier experience of trying to treat data as something in isolation at a certain point in the project. It is potentially setting yourself up for failure, because if that point is too late, you might have already made some decisions around the design of the system or the functionality of the system that you've realized don't accommodate some of the data. And if it's too early, you risk designing the system for the data without considering any of the business requirements, business processes. So it needs to be something that sort of lasts throughout the project, multiple touch points, and essentially something that sort of goes hand in hand with the process of designing the system and rolling out the system. Oftentimes as well, there are more sort of technical challenges with the data. We encounter organizations that struggle to even get the right permissions to get data out of old systems. Sometimes there's payment attached to doing that. So there can be sort of structural barriers, if we put it that way, to even an organization getting hands on the data. Of course, once they do move it and it's into a cloud-based system like Salesforce, it's very much then their own and they can get access to it any time. But whereas legacy systems, it's sometimes more of a struggle. That on its own can be a hurdle. And then I guess there's a bit of a learning curve in terms of that understanding of how the new system's data model is going to work, and that can sometimes work in a different way. Sometimes we're adding more structure to the data so that you can achieve the right level of reporting, and that results in the data needing to be what we call transformed, which is changed in some way throughout the process. Sometimes the client will have in-house capabilities to do that, sometimes not. But I think the point I'm making, you can see by the way I'm describing it, is very involved. So it needs to sort of run throughout the process and have key touch points with the main sort of system design and build process as well. And so, yeah, we're in a bit of a similar way to what we're talking about with user adoption. It's not something you can ignore until a certain stage. You need to really look at it at the outset and then throughout.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because we know systems behave differently when they've got a client's own data in them as well. Like you say,
indeed, yeah.
You got a nice shiny system, and then suddenly you chuck all the data, and it's like, oh, that doesn't work anymore. That doesn't do what we expected it to do anymore.
Yeah.
Would it be overstating it to say that that there's a case you could make that says it's actually a client's data, which is it's almost the most significant personalization of a system that you guys build? Because technically, I mean, I've seen your guys, they've got the expertise, they've got the experience, they can get. I don't think it's overstating to say that they can get Salesforce to do pretty much anything that anybody wants it to do, technically in that sense, but actually getting it to do what the business process the client needs with the data that they've got, is that arguably, is that kind of almost the biggest barrier to success that you need to overcome?
I do see some sense in that argument from the point of view that if we've got the sort of vision of a perfectly configured system that has all the right homes for the right data, and then the client's data doesn't support that because there's holes in it or it's incomplete, or actually an expectation of having a certain amount of historical data isn't met, those sorts of things can not sort of derail anything, but they can result in initially getting less value from the system, because it maybe needs to allow time for that data to build up in sort of the new design, or maybe is a bit of data cleansing or augmentation that the customer needs to do to really see the full benefit. So in terms of personalization, it's a bit of a tricky word, because immediately makes me think of marketing and outreach style personalization. But in terms of personalizing the system to the particular client we have, then that's really what we're saying as well. That data is at the heart of that, and there are pitfalls that we need to watch that we can't get right, and it can be about managing expectation as well. So coming back to governance and exec involvement, I'm sure I'm not going to get in too much trouble if I describe those individuals as typically, not always, but typically being furthest from the sort of day-to-day data. And so sometimes there can be a few shocks involved and a bit of expectation management around what the data the organization does or doesn't have. And so that's part of it as well.
Yeah, I think, and it's one of the, I don't know if it's an irony, but it is one of those things, isn't it, that actually when they have better technology, moving from a legacy system, they have this expectation that their data is great, they know exactly how many members they've got and who's paying their subs weekly, monthly, annually, whatever, and then you give them new technology. One of the many benefits of the new technology being that you can access your own data, you can start to drill into it to gain insights, business decision support, etc. And suddenly you find actually your data isn't that good, it's not that complete, you've got data integrity issues, and there's a danger then that people think that it's a technology issue, that the system isn't as good as they thought it was going to be, where actually it's just surfacing the fact that they need to do some work, and it's resolvable, that they need to do some work on cleansing their data. There's an interesting anecdote from a organization that we work with that were implementing Salesforce to move away from they needed to report to their funders, and they had one major funder, still do have one major funder, and so prior to having Salesforce, they had been looking at lots of different models to report on all the aspects they needed to report on, and many of these would be taking a small sample and then extrapolating that up to their full sort of member base or user base, and so they had all these weird and wonderful ways to report back to the funder, and so part of the intention for the project was that we could drive that reporting from Salesforce. And as you were getting at, that means it's there, it's in real time, whether I'm exec level or a more junior member of the team, I can just load that up and it will show me a graph that might have taken sort of 2 months of someone working on a spreadsheet to formulate before. And you're absolutely right, that can be a bit of a scary change for organizations. And in this particular case, whilst they had it all, they were slow then to let go of the old methods, and we're still in the habit of that. And
I think it did take that strong governance we're speaking about and almost a level of organizational confidence to actually say, right, okay, now we can see it here. It doesn't quite match what we had before. There may be a few upsets here that things may move up or down, but we do understand that this data in the Salesforce system is coming from the real-time inputs. It's more accurate than our previous ways. And they actually worked with their funder to move through that process together, which was really successful for them, and haven't looked back. So
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think we've covered like a lot of topics that we at Hart Square definitely speak to as well. So definitely change management, user adoption is something we speak about a lot, and of course data as well. And I know previously you mentioned at the top, trends around data. People are, becoming more aware of the importance of it, really. But just to pick up on that topic, just wanted to get your thoughts on, is beyond data and data itself, are there any other kind of trends you see happening in the sector that people are adopting or equally challenging in this space, really?
Yeah, I think the question around trends is always really really interesting, because I think given where we are sort of post-pandemic, think about macro level, there's probably a couple of 2 or 3 key trends, I think. So one is around organizations wanting to build resilience, and that might be in terms of funding. I was talking to one organization recently that the funders have had wobbles as a result of COVID, and so they're looking to perhaps diversify where their funding comes from. Another way they might be building resilience is in terms of getting the right support. So for those organizations that use volunteers, it's sort of shoring up the volunteer proposition, making sure that is still compelling. For fundraising organizations, it's about supporter relationships, etc. But that I think is a theme at the macro level of having that resilience. But sort of hand in hand with that is the idea of continually rising to the challenge. And obviously, whether it's pandemic recovery, whether it's the terrible situation in Ukraine, whether it's cost of living crisis, there is that constant theme of looking to rise to the challenge and looking to strive to do better, which I think is fantastic. So and then I think at a macro level, the third thing is probably coming back actually to data. It's that realization that there is power in the data. So a bit of a different point from data in the context of the implementation, but data that the organization owns. It's that sort of penny dropping that's quite important. And the example I'd use there is those sort of organizations in the nonprofit space that might bid on work to deliver contracts for government or for local councils would often, if you go back a few years, not really consider the data as theirs. They consider it as funder data, and their operations, their business process would all be about delivering that data back to the funders. And so I think what has changed, and a trend is more so the organization realizing the power of that data for itself, and it might still need to send a subset of that or more back to their funder. They need to obviously meet their commitments to report back to the funders, but that realization actually there is a power, there is a value in the data that can be retained within the organization as well, for its own needs and for its own future value, I think is a trend at the macro level. So yeah, those I think are some of the key trends at that level. And then in terms of more sort of what we'd see as day-to-day things in terms of CRM and what people are asking for, we're tending to see many more of what we might call foundational requirements being met. And foundational requirements, getting the basics right, being able to see a single view of your donor or a single view of your member in the system. Those sorts of things are foundational. But then it's reaching beyond that to say, how can we consolidate the different communications channels that we're using, or how can we have more focus on our CRM and CMS, our website working much more closely together, working in harmony. How can we push our self-service capabilities further? So it's not just allowing for instance, a member to sign up, but it's allowing a member to manage their billing, manage their renewals, and do that in a self-service way. So moving away from just the foundational capabilities to actually sort of driving forward on things that are ultimately freeing the client team up and delivering more value to the external audience.
No, that's really interesting, actually. And as you say, obviously a lot has changed over the past few years, and there always will be change. It's just, as you say, how we become resilient to it. I don't know that we've necessarily felt such dramatic change so quickly. So maybe that's why it's come so far to the forefront. And it kind of goes back to what you said, about what you do, and empowering, people to get closer to their members and their donors, for example. Seeing that single view, we all know that helps build that connection. So perhaps that's where they link together, really. But I don't know, Rob, you had a comment there as well?
Yeah, no, just absolutely going to echo what you said. I think you're right about the, that getting the basics right. It's like the time has passed where you kind of potter along and do your thing and rely on the informal, unstructured stuff. I think probably because of the physical separation of people, where you the three of us would have been a quite close fundraising team or something like that, and we're just sharing anecdotally, and it all worked, didn't it, when we could physically be together. And actually across all of what you said there, getting the basics right and enabling the digital tools and the outward facing tools, symptomatic of that, the physical distance that's come between people over the past couple of years, but really has driven a lot of innovation, I think, and it's kind of raised that baseline, hasn't it? It said actually that you can't be below this line anymore, and it's a lot higher than where it was digitally in that respect.
Definitely. And I think as well, there's a I don't know if demanding is the right word, but there's certainly an expectation from the external audience members as well, whether that's donors or funders or members, etc. Even if we think about engagement of younger demographics, Gen Zs, talking to a big conservation charity recently where they've had a lot of success with that sort of group, but they're also very conscious that the behavior is quite different and the expectation is quite different, and really starting to connect up that funding, which may be sort of even at the micro donation level, connecting up what impact that is having on their programs. So I think another trend we're starting to see is I guess comprehensive use of CRM systems that are organization wide, so you can not just see, okay, this is what the fundraising team is doing, this is how much they're bringing in, but link that through to what programs or service delivery is happening, such that you can go full circle and report back to those donors as to where their money's been spent in a much quicker way. Come back to that like real-time data thing, being able to have that loop happen a lot more regularly, I think is an expectation or a trend that we're seeing from an external audience point of view as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even certainly where we've been working with some organizations that are serving funders and trying to show their impact, adding that self-service component in there as well, so that even the funders are then able to self-serve, and they're not being sent a quarterly report or anything along those lines. It's like literally real time back again. So you've got to be really spot on with your data, as you say. You've got to join everything up and present it outwardly. Interesting how that all kind of, like you say, ties up on those themes. Brilliant. Thank you.
Definitely. So I think that brings us to time today. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today. We've covered some really great points there and topics, and some really great take-home advice as well. So thank you again for joining us.
Not at all. It's great to be here, and thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, David.